why do people care about the MVP so much? I don't understand why.
No, look, I'm happy for Joel. You know, you spend 3 years constantly campaigning in every single aspect, every interview opportunity. No, I don't really care about the MVP, but I should win it.
Welcome to Gamblin and Ramblin, a weekly show where we react and rant about the weekend in sports betting. I'm Tim Kalinowski. I'm joined by Charlie DiSturco. You can follow us both in the Action app, Action YouTube channel, at Action Network HQ on TikTok and Twitter. Great job, Tim. Matt Moore, we have a special guest. It's great to have you, our NBA guru. Matt, I really enjoy our times we crossed over on Green Dot Daily, because we're kind of like a yin and a yang here. Charlie and I love to hate on, regular season NBA. We try and bet it to the best of our ability, but it is great to have someone on here who can kind of challenge us a little bit and also get some insight. So welcome, Matt. First off, what do you think about the Nuggets and how the NBA Finals went down?
It was great. It was profitable. Got him 21 in preseason. There was a real opportunity there. I'm pissed at myself for not buying in more. Like, I learned a lot from this Nuggets run. Because, like, for years, I've been like, don't listen to March basketball. March basketball in the NBA, amongst all of the noise and how completely messed up most of the NBA regular season is, March is the worst. And then for some reason, I was like, I don't know, the Nuggets were pretty shitty in March. And then I talked myself out of it. And that was unfortunate because I was like, I'm just going to bet the Celtics versus the Suns. And that's going to be the finals. No, and like, it was great for me because I was able to bet them. I bet them versus the Wolves in short, versus the Suns in 6. And versus the Lakers, I bet a -2.5. So, and versus the Heat, like, came out big on them series by series. Covering them, it was really fantastic. I've been here for 11 years in Denver covering this team. So I've gone all the way from when it was Masai Ujiri and Ty Lawson, who was getting drunk like every single weekend and getting DUIs, all the way through like the rebuilding project, and JJ Hickson, who is the worst individual I've ever had to cover in the NBA, who once made fun of my shoes. And then I responded with, yeah, but they've touched the floor more than yours have. And that did not go over well in the locker room. And then all the way through this rebuilding era with Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray and all these guys, seeing these guys come up. Like, I was on the conference call with Jamal Murray coming out of Kentucky when people were like, do you think you can play point guard? And he responded, I am a point guard. And I was like, oh, okay, Jamal's going to be one of those dudes. And he has been, and he was awesome. And then getting to be in that locker room. I'll also tell you this, that somebody that I know you guys have had some issues with the NBA at large. I'll just tell you, look, it's draining and it's taken its toll on me, but being in the building with that much hope for Nuggets fans, having never won a championship and having that much hope in a building and see it pay off was really reaffirming for me. It was a really cool moment. Great celebration. My clothes are still at the dry cleaners from all the champagne that they got covered in from that celebration. It was cool to see guys like Ish Smith and DeAndre Jordan and Jeff Green, who had played so long in the league, finally winning a championship. It was really cool. It was really cool to be along for the ride.
Do you, so obviously everyone talks about Nikola Jokic and the triple doubles, and Jamal Murray was the story of the entire postseason. Was there anything that kind of caught your eye through this Nuggets run? Because it was dominance, right? Like, it was, they just rolled by every single team. It just seemed like it was a non-competitive series almost every single time for them. What was like the biggest takeaway from this team and like identity as a whole, and like any role players that really stuck out to you?
Yeah, so it was like it was really a proof of concept because they built this team with a couple things in mind. They built off the success from the bubble, and they basically went all in on that. And a lot of it was size. Like, that's what's really funny is you think about Jokic and you're like, all the passing and like the, all of the moves and all of those types of things. And the Nuggets were bullies. They bullied everyone. They bullied Karl Anthony Towns. They bullied Devin Booker and Kevin Durant and DeAndre Ayton, and they bullied Anthony Davis. They bullied him out the back of the basket. The Heat, they didn't bully as much. They bullied some of their wing players. That team's pretty tough. They were just better than them. I think when you look back, Aaron Gordon is going to probably be overlooked as far as like having been such a big part of it. He had a monster game 4 in the finals, but he had great games. AG wound up guarding Karl Anthony Towns, who's like 0.45 times his size. He wound up guarding Kevin Durant, LeBron James, and Jimmy Butler. That was AG's defensive run, and he did awesome every single round. So it was cool to see that. The other thing is just that when we're going forward and you're betting, there's a couple things that I've kind of talked about. One, I think we're in an era, you got to have a high offensive floor. The whole defense wins championships things, I think, is over. I think you still need defense. You can't be shitty on defense, but you're going to need to be at least like you're going to need to be at a pretty high level offensively with where the game is at and how it's called now by the officials. And then you need to be able to solve problems. We saw a bunch of great defensive teams get waxed in the playoffs because they only know how to play one way. They can defend one way. You have to have multiple solutions for the different problems you're going to face in the playoffs. And that makes approaching, I think, futures betting for NBA really interesting going forward.
I see that as like almost it's more important to make sure you don't go cold on offense than it is to defend exceptionally well, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a lot of it, right? Is like if you have these stretches where you're just miserable offensively, like the Boston Celtics, and then you just like look like absolute trash for these long stretches, it can be the end of you. And even in these games, it was funny because everyone's like, well, yeah, but the end of that Heat Nuggets series was a real slog. And it's like, yeah, because that's the way the Heat play is they drag you down in the muck and they want to play this really ugly game. But that was the thing is even when the Heat grabbed them from underneath the muck like zombies and tried dragging them down into the mud, Denver's offensive potential was still so high, it didn't matter. So every single series they faced, nobody could slow them down enough to get past them. If your floor is so high offensively like Denver's, you're going to be able to get past, I think, most teams in the playoffs because your worst is still better. And when they're spending all of their time trying to get you worse on offense.
And I know, Matt, our podcast, or I guess our show, Gamblin Ramblin, is a pro Nikola Jokic show. We are all about him. We think he's the greatest big man, especially in the league right now. I have to bring this up because we talk about the Nuggets winning the finals and Joel Embiid, the fraudulent MVP. I just need you to talk a little bit about him for the fans at home, especially Anthony DeBundo. Let them know how much of a fraud Joel Embiid is.
No, look, I'm happy for Joel. You know, you spend 3 years constantly campaigning in every single aspect, every interview opportunity. No, I don't really care about the MVP, but I should win it every time. If for someone like me that covers the league in such a meta kind of concept, especially when you see like, oh, it's March 1st. I wonder, let's check my watch. I wonder when the Joel Embiid feature profile, 2022, Chris Mannix and SI, right on time. 2023, Shams Charania and The Athletic, right on time. Congrats for finally getting it. The whole thing with the MVP this year is Jokic was pretty rough in the first month of the season on defense, and he completely tanked off at the last month of the season, especially after the whole conversation got especially toxic because of Sixers fans, like, and Kendrick Perkins. Congrats to Perk. Once that happened, like, he tailed off. So I don't even necessarily think that Jokic should have won MVP. But when we look at like who actually are the best players in the league, especially if you're going to make this completely asinine argument about who's had more playoff success, who can do it in the playoffs, never bring up Joel Embiid to me again. Don't bring him up to me until he makes a conference finals, let alone a finals, because that guy has always been solved. When Joel Embiid learns how to handle a double team for the first time in his career, then we can maybe talk about him winning another MVP or being a serious NBA legitimately great player.
Matt, it pisses me off to no end as an NBA casual. Why do people care about the MVP so much? I don't understand why. Like Charlie, like even Charlie asking the question, I'm sitting here like, why are we talking about the MVP? Why do people care about it so much? If like, you know, I know it's kind of the nature, it's an individualistic type of league and the players real, you know, it's a you follow your favorite players over your favorite teams, but why do people care about it so much? Who cares?
Okay, so I'll put this in perspective. I decided early on in my career, like I'm working at CBS and I'm doing aggregation, right? I'm writing these long blog posts, not how it is now where it's like you just jam out a tweet, but like taking a quote and talking about it in context, doing research and providing blog posts on it at CBS, right? And you have to talk about MVP so much that I've said you have to make a decision if you're covering the NBA. You either have to not care about the individual awards at all. You have to just be like, I don't care, it's not my lane, whatever. And you can do that. Or you could be like me and be like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it in the most psychotically intense way possible. And the reason it matters, I think, from a perspective, the story of college football is great teams and great coaches. The story of college basketball is great teams and great coaches, and like the players are kind of mentioned somewhere in there. And then the story of the NBA is great players, because when you're at this level and the difference and the gap is so much wider because of how good these players are, that it winds up really defining it. And Stern was the first one to kind of identify this. This is what's funny, is Stern is thought of as the hard ass, and he was. But if you go back and you read some of the history, and it Breaks the Game as a great book on it by Halberstam, he talks about how David Stern was the first to be like, this is a players league. We're going to build around players. And that's how we're going to market it. And so if your history is defined by those players, this award is literal proof of excellence, because winning a championship, you can win a lot of championships and not have done a lot. Robert Horry has a bunch of championships when he was made some big shots, but was just a role player. Steve Kerr's won a lot of championships, was just not just there. He was a participant, but wasn't the biggest reason. But the MVP is a very telling history of what the era has been defined as. And that was what was really interesting about the Jokic discussion over the last couple of years, is nobody wanted to put him on that level. Everyone was like, we can't give it to him. We're not going to look back and be like, Nikola Jokic was one of the greatest players. And now, after this run, everyone's going to be like, oh yeah, of course we're going to look back and be like, oh yeah, Nikola Jokic is one of the greatest players. It almost is one of those things where the process winds up telling you a lot about how you should feel about the league, rather than how you feel determining how you feel about these awards. It should work a little bit the other way, because history's been pretty right, with a couple of rare exceptions throughout the course of the award. The other thing, I mean this very sincerely, Tim, it's really great to bet on. If you figure out the patterns and how to bet it and when, especially if you're somebody like me that wants like a million positions and to basically build a portfolio and constantly be trying to figure out who I need to add to and when, there's a real opportunity. And we've made massive bank on MVP like 3 of the last 4 years. We did fine with Joel this year. We hedged appropriately, but like there's a massive opportunity in betting these awards, because the market is typically behind where the conversation should be headed.
Gotcha. I mean, that helps me in the gambling on it, right? Because that's a way that hey, if we can make money off of it, yes, now I care about it. And
right.
And there is to an aspect, right? You're handicapping the vote on an award, not necessarily who is the best player.
Right.
And so obviously that's a significant part of your handicap. And so you're saying that the voting, handicapping the voting and the actual lines, that creates an opportunity to make some money off of it. Is that kind of the idea?
So like we've talked about a lot about this over on Buckets, our NBA pod. So a lot of this is, there are certain metrics that have actually revealed what the voters value, and people are like, oh, so the voters just look at this number? I'm like, no, most of them don't even know it exists. Like most of the voters don't look at advanced, not most, half of the voters don't look at advanced metrics. But there's this metric called EPM. A guy has been top 3 each of the last 10 seasons, has won MVP. Like that narrows down the field incredibly, and it's year over year, where typically you need to be top 5 or top 10 the previous season. So like we got all that data on there. But the other thing is to consider with the voting block. Like I do a lot of this because I'm a former voter, and so I understand, and I talk to the only thing I do better than write about the NBA is write about NBA media and understanding it. And like I know all these voters, a lot of them, not all of them, but I know a lot of them. And so I know what the chunk is. Like I've actually gone through the voter roll and been able to ascribe them. Is this a national TV person that's going to have to back up a strong take? Is this a beat writer who's probably going to be looking at metrics and then talking to scouts and coaches about who they think should win? Is this an analyst that their entire job is to watch the league at a high profile and determine who the best player is, like a Zach Lowe? You can break the voting block into these different types, and then you'll be able to get a sense for who's going to vote for what. And that's why Jokic was such good value, because the beat writers were going to reward Jokic despite all of the narrative talk against him, when the narrative voters were definitely going to go Embiid, which they did. And then this season was a really weird out with how Joel's narrative took over everything, and really is more of an anti-Jokic narrative that looks incredibly stupid now. But that's how it kind of plays out when looking at it. The NBA, like there's a lot of opportunity, especially, Tim Bontemps takes a lot of grief for his straw poll over to ESPN. But in what other sport do we actually get an actual like poll ahead of time? Like, you can tell me this, like, is there like a really strong indicator? Are there polls that are taken in college football or NFL that actually give us a sense of who those guys are, who the voters themselves are leaning towards in these situations?
Not really. And I think that's kind of the uniqueness of the NBA, and why they do so well is because they're willing to like pull back the curtain in a lot of ways that other sports aren't. Like, I appreciate that aspect of it.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the one thing you're good at is talking to the NBA media and running about that and all that. And obviously you work at a sports gambling company, but there was a whole other career before this. Can you take us through what you did before? Because I have friends, right? They hate gambling. They don't gamble on sports. But I mentioned Matt Moore, and they're like, "Oh, HP, like I love him. I listen and read everything like that he puts out." So like, you have an audience that's not just gambling. So can you just take us through like how you got into the NBA and what you've done kind of leading up to the Action Network?
Yeah, so it's like 2007, and I'm getting married, and my future wife is like, "Hey, so I know you enjoy the bar, but you're gonna need to get a hobby and maybe not close down the bar every single night." And I was like,
why
all right,
not?
fair, because like I used to help the bar like lock up, like I had a key to the place. It was not good. So I was like, all right, I'm going to start a blog. Like, this is 2007, heyday of the blog. So Buddy and we decided to start a blog, and I named it Hardwood Paroxysm. And we start writing on there, and I send some stuff over to Henry Abbott, who used to work at ESPN. He ran like a really influential blog called True Hoop, and he links me, and that puts me in like on the map a little bit. And then I start like talking with these other writers, and Tom Ziller, who used to write at AOL Fan House and SB Nation, he and I got to be like, we would converse and talk. And one day I was like, well, eventually I'd love to work for AOL Fan House. This is a website that is now long defunct, but it was like,
I hear AOL and I'm like, yeah,
I know,
like the early 2000s.
Right? Yeah. So Fan House. But here's the crazy thing about Fan House. Like, Will Brinson, CBS, came out of there. Tom Fernelli, CBS, came out of there. Like, the list of guys that came out of AOL Fan House that now have major jobs in the industry is long. I'm talking to Tom one day, and I'm like, well, eventually I'd like to write for Fan House, but I'm like, it's like a dream, because I just started like, for like a half a year. And he's like, you want to write for Fan House? I was like, yeah. He's like, give me 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, an editor emails me and is like, hey, can you start this weekend? Awesome. So like, I'm doing part-time work there while doing a day job. I'm like, I was a project manager, so I was able to like do my day job work, and then I'm writing in between on my lunch break and in the car, and I'm doing interviews and stuff like this. And now I did that for 3 years. And then in 2010, I knew a guy that started work at NBC for the Pro Basketball Talk, which was, they expanded Pro Football Talk from Florio into all these different sites, Pro Hockey Talk and all the other ones. And he's like, hey, I need a weekend editor. So I started work at Pro Basketball Talk, and I was the weekend editor. That put me like my first like major paid gig. And 6 months later, I run into, at a blog conference, I run into a guy at CBS, Eric Kay, who gave me my first big break in the industry. And like, CBS hadn't done anything. They didn't have a blog platform. They didn't have a quick format. All they did was like AP stories and the occasional column. And so he's like, we need to catch up. Can you help us? And I was like, yeah. So I got brought on there, and that was my first full-time gig. I started on we didn't have a blog. All they had was like basically the fans write blog posts section. I had to start on there and then get promoted. I started the week of the decision from LeBron James in 2010. So it was absolute insanity. But what was crazy is like, we do these stories, they put them on the front page, and I get a call from like the desk editor, the senior editor. And he's like, so we don't really know what to do with you. And I was like, why? And he's like, you have 4 of the top 5 stories on the site over the last week. And I was like, it's the NBA free agent. Like, LeBron just moved, man. But we grew there, and like I helped get on Brinson there, and Matt Norlander and Matt Snyder, and a lot of the guys that are still at CBS. And CBS was my first like legit job, and started covering finals and draft and all-star, and learned a ton about the industry and learned a ton about the league. And I did that until 2018, when Chad Millman came calling and was like, hey, we're starting a gambling company. Do you want in? And I was really interested in that. And I thought that was really going to be the future. And I loved the opportunity to build something and was ready for a new challenge. So I jumped on at Action.
Did you always gamble on hoops as well?
Yeah. So this is going back even further. 2006-ish, I was running poker games at bars and restaurants in Austin, Texas. So I'm like driving up and down. I'm working like 3 jobs, but I'm also like running these poker games at night. And there was this great sports bar. I mean, it is the best sports bar I have ever been at. Red and black everything. TVs in front of every booth table that you could, like, they would put on any game in the universe that you wanted. It is the model. Great food, great tap selection. It was amazing. I'm working that thing, and there's a guy that comes up to me, and I've known him for a little bit, and he's like, hey, I don't want to cause any trouble. Would you mind if I asked some folks if they wanted to place wagers while they're here on sports? He's running like a very, very not above board book. And I was like, I don't care. I don't run the place. So I was like, if you got their permission, it's fine with me. And so like, that was my first exposure to it. And I would just ask him questions, and that really got me into it. And like, I would put some wages on it, but I was broke as hell. But then when I started making money, a little bit money later, then I did start, like, I really started seeing like, oh wow, like, you know, NBA really wasn't as big as it is now. So you could bet it pretty consistently and get, I think, a little bit softer lines. And then I just like started consuming all sorts of betting content as much as I could.
I mean, you mentioned when you first started gambling, it was a little bit softer for the NBA. Obviously, we've come such a long way with the growing interest and popularity of gambling makes the lines extremely sharp, especially in the NFL. In the NBA, was it mostly sides and totals where you found the edge, or did you find softer in the prop market, for instance, which I know is a way that a lot of experts at our company still try to attack?
Yeah, here's what's weird. I'm terrible at props. I can't, like, because all of my stuff is X's and O's based. And that's like the big gap here is like, I can tell you, I think that the football comparison would be like, I know about how the wide receivers are going to run routes versus the preferred coverage of the defense, but I can't fill in the gaps of, oh, but there's like a broken play and it's a dump off to a running back that picks up 15 yards and that winds up hitting the, like, those are the things I can't account for. I can tell you all about how a team defends and how a team plays offense and their strengths and weaknesses on both sides, but I can't figure out the big picture. I can't see the forest for the trees in the prop market. For me, it's like sides and totals. Finally built a model 2 years ago, and it's worked out really great for me. It's improved my ROI considerably. It's gotten my numbers way, way closer to where I want them to be. Betting the spot is obviously a big part of it. Knowing the biggest part for me, and honestly, in NBA, and you guys will relate to this because of how much you are reticent towards the NBA structure code. You hate it. Like the answer here is knowing when not to bet the NBA, I think, is really important, but it's also takes a lot of attention. Like you have to know, like, oh, they're in a 5 and 7. Like this doesn't pop on it. They're on a back-to-back, but they're on a 5 and 7, and covering the league daily, I found edges where I'm like, especially, I will tell you, this is what's interesting, is going to the games and covering it from a traditional media perspective. I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I was, the Hawks were in town and they were on a back-to-back versus the Nuggets, and they rested everybody. And I was like, okay, sure. And like the line had already adjusted, whatever. But then like talking to people close to the team, they were like, yeah, there's a bug going around. Like everybody's sick. And that's not stuff that's going to show up on an injury report. Like maybe one guy will, but you don't know that. And they're like, yeah, no, like, and then you've also find out stuff like, yeah, no, they beat the Lakers and then they had a good time in LA after. And so you hear that kind of stuff and you're like, I'm going to be against the Hawks in the following game when they got another game 2 days later after another flight. And surely enough, they failed to cover versus OKC as a favorite. Like it's those kind of spots that you have to be able to look for. And there's like little information, but it's also stuff like being able to recognize, this has been like a really, I think, interesting point. One of the things I love about the stuff that we do at Action is it makes stuff that's pretty boring otherwise suddenly pretty interesting because the numbers provide a different way to look at it. If Joel Embiid is out, how much is he worth at the spread? Okay, like how have they done without him, and how much are these guys actually worth the spread? And being able to determine that, I think, is like a really interesting thing because so often people would just turn it into a binary. With the NBA, it's got to be number based. You got to figure out, okay, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's out. Is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander worth 4 points to the spread when like prime Paul George was worth 3.5? Probably not, right? Probably 3. Like probably 3. SGA whips ass, but probably not 4 points. And so like, oh, this line is over adjusted relative to what it should be. And finding those kind of questions is how I get through the slog of the NBA regular season.
Is it true, and I don't know if this is true or not, but it's what I've heard before, players will come into a game, they'll play like a midweek game in Indiana and be like, well, it's a midweek game in Indiana. There's going to be half the fans there. It's not on national television. We're just going to punt this game and just fuck around. Is that like a thing that happens in the NBA? Because that's one of the qualms that I have with trying to bet it, is that Milwaukee comes in, they're 9-point favorites to Indiana Pacers, and then they lose outright because they just like punted the game.
So there are very successful bettors in the space that bet entirely based off of injury. They're like, injury is the key. You react before the line moves on injury. That's how you move. And like, I respect that, but I can't figure out all of the determinations based off of my analysis with like, sometimes injury matter and sometimes they don't because of how the teams are constructed. For me, and I've said this consistently on buckets, the number one driver of value in the NBA is motivation. How motivated are these guys? And if that pisses you off, I don't blame you, because I'm of the opinion that if you get paid $24 million a year, that should be reason enough for you to, but I get it because like Draymond's talked about this. Like Draymond's talked about this openly. He's like, you expect me with this engine to get up for the Kings on a Tuesday, right? And that's the thing is the NBA structure beats that out of them, because you can only try and psych yourself up. The NFL, it's you got 16 shots and you better get up for it. Because if you don't, like losing 1 out of 16 could be devastating for your entire season's hopes and your career and everything. You lose to Indiana on a Tuesday and you shoot 5 of 18 from the field, and it's just not a big deal. So you have to be able to find that. And I will say, like, there is an inherent variance that I think is present in most of the sports, not as much football. Football is more about like, look, there's only so many games and there's only so many possessions. So like, that's where you can get screwed, like a random turnover, and like that can kill your entire bet. But in the NBA, I understand why it's got to be infuriating, because like it's definitely a thing. Like I've been on the league's case for years about shortening the schedule, because if we can get this thing down to where the players feel like, and we've seen this with the play-in tournament, those teams that are in the play-in tournament, if they're not the cowardly Dallas Mavericks, when they have a month left of the season, they're busting ass, and those games whip. Like those games are awesome and they're great to bet because you get the best opportunity for both teams because there's stakes. Like this is the problem with the NBA regular season. At 82 games, there are no longer stakes in the season when you have 16 teams that make the playoffs, 8 in each conference, 10 in the play-in. There's just not enough stakes game by game. You should find and try and target teams and figure out, if you're going to bet on a team, is this a team whose profile is, we do bring it every night, we are intent on capturing seeding, we do care about winning. And you're not going to hit it all the time, but there are teams like the Boston Celtics, they want to win every game. The Memphis Grizzlies, they want to win all of the home games. Like you can find win profiles for these teams as you follow the league, and that's really what you're going to have to do if you're going to be able to bet it appropriately.
Yeah, I will say a lot of my, like, you know, my hatred for the NBA honestly comes from the point of I have a lot of respect for that type of gambling that you said, how much of an investment it is to know, hey, this is a 5 and 7. Like I'm a casual, but I'm a casual, right? So I'm doing that already with, say, NHL, college basketball, that I'm kind of like, you know what? I can't invest enough time in this league that I'm going to miss those things. So that I'm just like, okay, I hate you, you know, like it's, you know, it's more like that, because it's, and I would say for someone, at least like my advice or how I would look at it, it's like, maybe just follow your team, say the Celtics. And then if you follow just your one team, then you know, if they're playing a 5 and 7, you know, if okay, this is a Tuesday night for my team, I follow them. I know that this is a Tuesday night in Indiana, whatever, they might punt. It's like, it's hard to do that for all 30. And it's an incredible amount of investment. That's why I'm just like, okay, I hate you, go away.
Yeah. And like, So the Nuggets are a good example of this too, where I was on them heavy in this early March game versus the Grizzlies. And they were at home after having lost to Memphis the Saturday before because they were on a back-to-back. Like they beat Cleveland in a big game to finish their road trip. To almost finish the road trip. They go to Memphis on a back-to-back, and I was like, they're not going to care about that game. And sure enough, they get beat. They're back home from Memphis, and this Memphis game decides tiebreaker and puts them 4 games up for the #1 seed. This was effectively a game where if they won, I would have raised their chances of securing home court throughout the NBA playoffs, or at least through the Western Conference playoffs, by like 25%, because Memphis was the only team that could catch them. And I was like, they're at home, revenge spot. They're rested. They match up well with Memphis. They just watched Memphis dance on them when they were getting beat by 30 a week ago. Hammered the Nuggets, and sure enough, they absolutely kill them. But then there are spots where it's like, oh yeah, Denver's definitely losing this game. They're gonna fuck around in this game. Because like there's a certain amount of fuck around with every NBA team depending on the spot. The only teams that are not like that are Tibbs teams, which is why Tibbs teams are great to bet in the regular season, and they're great to fade in the playoffs, because when you try hard in the regular season, you usually don't have a higher gear. And that's like why the playoffs are better, is you can look at it and go, what is their best, but like what's the best version of this team healthy? And you can kind of get a better sense of that. And even then though, like there's nights when like guys will tell you like, yeah, no, we just didn't have it that night. And you're like, you're down 2-0 and you didn't have it. But that's just the way that the NBA is wired with how much money they're making guaranteed now.
Yeah. Okay. Why can't the Celtics break through?
Okay. All right. So there's a couple of things here. We got to look back at the whole, a big picture thing. Stevens was a great coach, managed them efficiently. He managed it. One of his keys, and I listened to him on a radio interview, and it helped me a lot with betting him, because he used to be Brad Stevens' team, Celtics teams on a back-to-back was one of the golden spots in sports, because the line automatically moves about 2.5 points if they're on the back-to-back. With Boston, he literally said, if we win our back-to-backs, it increases our like win percentage and chances at X seed by whatever percent. He found that there was this inefficiency where most teams go the other direction, and there's a letdown spot where most teams are like, oh, they're on a back-to-back, we got this. But if you come in and you hit them in the mouth, then those teams go down easy. And so he would win all these games in the regular season, and he was really good about finding, he was good, not elite, but he was good about finding enough success in the playoffs. Udoka comes in and takes over, and they're shit for the first half of the year, and then they turn it on, and for 6 months they are like the best team in basketball, and they sucker us into betting against the Warriors of all teams in the finals. I'm never gonna forgive Brandon Anderson for getting me on that bet. And they go into this year, and they start off red hot offensively, but there were cracks in the armor. They showed some issues defensively. The big thing with them is 80% of the NBA ish, maybe 85, is all pick and roll offense. Everything is generated from pick and roll, right? Center or forward, screens for guard, space the floor, kick out to shooter or drive to the rim, pull up three, right? The Celtics are one of the few teams that don't do that. They don't have a consistent pick and roll option. It's two wings and Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum handling the ball. And all of their offense is still left over from Stevens in that it's perimeter oriented. It's honestly a little bit more college, where it's like side to side movement on the perimeter, isolation attacks, draw help, kick to shooters, shoot a high volume of 3-pointers to make up for the lack of that leveraging the defense. You get into a playoff series, and there are just these times when their offense, I mean, it just melts. It is just like an ice cream bar, and it just melts into a puddle on the sidewalk and gets stomped on. And that's what happened versus the Sixers, and it happened versus the Heat, and honestly it happened versus the Hawks. On buckets, we talked about this. We were like, I took plus 2.5 on the Hawks. I was like, they're gonna screw around for at least, or it was plus 3.5. I was like, they're gonna screw around for at least 2 games. Like the Celtics will screw around for at least 2 games, and they did the same thing versus the Sixers. I was like, the Celtics are gonna screw around. The difference was I still thought that they would not screw around so much that they lose. But the Heat, they ran into this Heat team that was so on fire offensively, shot 43% from 3, that now there's like this, that they removed that margin of error for themselves. I think a lot of this has to do with Tatum and him still being the best player at a very young age. I think some of it has to do with him not having a consistent pick and roll option because Robert Williams just isn't really that guy and he's always hurt. So adding Porzingis, I actually think is a really smart move for what they want to do. And a lot of that's the absence of like a guard that can really settle the offense. They need somebody who can be a floor general and be like, we need to settle down. Malcolm Brogdon, we thought might be that guy, and he just wasn't. He was more of like a scoring threat, secondary creator. And I think it's one of the reasons they moved on from Smart is I think long-term they want to try and get a guard in there that can actually run things. But that's the real offense. That's the real story is that their defense is still good enough, and their offense at its best is good enough. We saw them make the conference finals again, but they just melt enough to where I don't think you can trust them to get all the way home.
It frustrates me that it seems like it's you see that on TV that melting and you painted it well with the actual X's and O's and why that happens. What's frustrating is it seems to be the same story over and over. Is like their kryptonite is always when that melts, and it's like why. I guess it feels like they keep addressing it, or now they're sort of addressing it. It feels like it's the same reason they lose over and over again, and it seems not addressed.
I think that a lot of it was honestly this is okay. So the nuance is important here. Marcus Smart was so important to them from a culture and identity and how much effort he gives. And like Marcus Smart's an awesome player. He is awesome. And he's a huge benefit to Memphis. I love that fit. I think that's a great addition for them. But if you're playing Smart, you're inherently not playing a player that can do the things that you need in this capacity. They're banking on Derek White being able to do it. I still think they could probably use another guard. I don't know where they're going to get it. But you need somebody to still kind of fill that role. But I think moving on from Smart is like the first step. It's a painful one, but it's the first step in kind of being like, we need somebody else to be able to settle this thing down. And maybe some of that's just like Tatum developing. Maybe that's just experience with Tatum. Because there are times when Tatum would do that and he would be really in control of the game. Like this is one of the huge differences that I think people miss is I always kind of judge NBA players by two factors. Production and impact, and they're not the same. You need guys that are going to put up 10 rebounds a game. You need guys that are going to put up 25 points a game, but you also need guys that are going to impact and do the things that help you win. And those are the guys that usually stand up in the advanced metrics. And Smart's like an impact guy, but he's not necessarily a production guy. And what they really needed though was like a guy that could meld the two, where it was like high assist level. Smart had the assists, but could also just like manage the offense and get everything to where it needed to be. There are very few of those guys. There's getting to be fewer and fewer of them. And that's a real absence in the league. And you're seeing that in the free agency market. Like Gabe Vincent's going to make a bank this summer. He's going to make really good money because teams are just like, we just need like a good point guard who knows how to run offense and isn't just like, this is a lot of the Steph result is just don't need guys that are going to take 35-foot pull-up threes. Need somebody that can actually run the offense. I don't think Boston's quite there, but they're closer to it than they were.
Felt kind of similar, and I was hoping that they were going to maybe weasel their way into Chris Paul, because I thought that would kind of be again a veteran to kind of help things and a facilitator. But it's interesting because you said that those guys are few and far between now, or at least less and less. Is that because like college point guards are college point guards and it doesn't really translate? Or
I talked to Mike Conley once, so I went on this Twitter rant about Mike Conley when they gave him the extension in like 2010, and I called it the worst move in franchise history for a team that drafted Hasheem Thabeet. And so like I went off on this thing, and then so years later when Conley became a borderline all-star, I actually sat down with him and did like the apology interview over at CBS. And he was like, actually, you were right about a lot of the stuff. Like I didn't know, because I used to talk about how he didn't have a dribble probe and he didn't have this and he didn't have that. And he was like, you weren't wrong. He's like, I just got better. And one of the things I asked him, I was like, how long does it take to run point guard in the NBA? And he was like, 5 years. He's like, it takes 5 years of work year over year for you to really know how to run a team. And until then, there's still so much that you don't, like the first 2 years, you're just trying to get it to slow down for you. And then the next 2, you're trying to add in additional reads. And then that final year, you're trying to put it all together to be able to make reads, know when to shoot, know when to pass, know when to back it out, to have a sense of all of the things that you have to do to be able to run point in the NBA. And I think that because of the nature of how much pick and roll is run in the NBA versus college, that creates a big differential. It just takes repetition for 5 years for you to really know how to do it at the level that you need to be effective. To me, it's the hardest position in the NBA. Center is the most valuable right now because there's at once, you can't pay too much for a center, but you can't not pay for one. But if we're talking about what's the hardest position in the NBA, it's point guard. You have to manage so much stuff at all times. You have to keep others happy. You have to score, because if you can't, teams are going to be able to scheme against you effectively. You have to have patience, but you have to have intent. You have to understand clock. All of these things go into it. It's really difficult, and that's one of the reasons why I think guards really struggle coming out of college sometimes.
I feel like that's almost like De'Aaron Fox's situation, where I feel like it took like a decade for him to have like his real coming out party. And I always thought I loved watching him at Kentucky, but I guess that 5 years thing makes a lot of sense. And a lot of teams aren't willing to wait that, because in the nature of the NBA draft, it's you get drafted and you go immediately play.
Yep. Yeah, and a lot of that too is, Fox was good from the jump, because if you are just faster than everyone else, you're gonna be like you can stick. Like, you can make yourself last till you can add those other types of things. And like Fox is just so damn quick. Like, he's just so fast, and he's got a great handle too. That's the other thing I would say is a lot of the guys that will flame out or bust are guards that have the athleticism but not the handle. That's why I'm going to be very curious about Amen Thompson, who I love his game and I love his fit. We just don't know, based off of where coming out of elite, that we don't know that he's really been challenged on his handle enough for how that's going to work in the NBA. Is he going to be able to, if he does, if his handle's tight enough, I love that fit for the Rockets and think that he could be the guy that kind of makes everything kind of fit together. Free agency stuff is really interesting based off of what I've heard, but that's like a really interesting fit versus, there are other guys. If you're just a guy that has just this is the concern with Scoot, is the handle's good, but like if you're just athleticism, if you can't shoot, like there are real concerns about, can you develop enough to get where you need to go? So like there's a lot of these questions, and that is one of the things is guys are now coming out of elite and they're coming out of the G League with more athleticism but less of these base skills. And I do wonder if there's going to be an inefficiency for teams looking at college guards and being able to say, that guy can run a team. Like, he actually knows how to like run a team a little bit. He's further along than this guy who's all athleticism. And I wonder if there's going to be a little bit of move back towards that, even though I would have liked to have seen the NBA adopt different draft rules.
Charlie, this has been awesome. Matt, this has been awesome. Want to do our degenerate moment of the week here, Charlie?
Yeah, I guess my degenerate moment of the week was watching you commentate putt mini golf competition and having money on these 50, 60-year-old men in a competition and losing because I took your pick.
Yeah, Matt, we do this thing, degenerate moment of the week. It's like when you a spot you found yourself like, again, sitting in a bar and all of a sudden like the place is empty and you're still sweating, like, a team total under or something like that. So yeah, I guess mine would be at mini golf this past weekend. When they first reached out, like, hey, do you want to hop on the broadcast for this professional mini golf? I'm like, yeah, it seems fun. Like, oh no, you can bet on it. There's lines, there's this, and these guys show up with real putters. They have greens books. I was watching them. So the event was on Monday, and they're all there on Sunday practicing, and they'll be at one hole like for 20 minutes putting a dozen balls, and then they're like, oh wait, my line's wrong, and they'll be missing their hole-in-ones, and then they step over to the side and they just bury it, hole-in-one, like, that's my line, and then they write it in their little book. So it was pretty incredible to watch. I was sweating. Our one bet, we had this guy Tony Varnador, and he had you had to get out of the first round. It was 2 rounds, and he had like a 3-stroke lead in the first round, and I was in the color or the play-by-play guy was like, Tim, and he doesn't bet, or he doesn't really bet like we do. And he's like, Tim, wow, your pick is just killing it. Like, he's really going to find his way to the second round. And I'm like, don't say it. Of course, guy completely gags, doesn't make it out of the first round. So my degenerate moment of the week is basically having someone who is a casual bettor tell you that your bet looks like a lock. And he did not realize that you do not say that to someone that gave out a pick to everyone else. My
friend had the same thing when I had the Seattle Baltimore first 5 under 4.5 and ended on 5 after my friend said we're good, and then the George Kirby, who has a 1% walk rate, walked the guy and then stole second, and as he was stealing, the worst hitter on the team, Anthony Ben Boom, hit a bloop over the first baseman. The second baseman bobbled it, and Mateo scored from first on a ball that was hit 100 feet.
So
Can I give one?
Matt, I'm
Yes.
sure. Yeah, I'm sure you have. I was either the poker story was pretty good.
The WNBA too. You're betting that every day. It's gotta be.
I'm betting that, but no, the one is definitely the draft.
Oh.
So, I one of the things I think that we're really valuable at Action is I talk to a lot of scouts and various people, league personnel. Okay, and so I've got these, and a lot of it is bullshit that you're trying to like translate through and figure out what is and what is not. So I start hearing like, yeah, no, there's X, Y, and Z teams that like Kobe Brown out of Missouri in the first round. And so I take him at 16-1 to go first round before the line moves. And like, it's at 28. And I'm just like, oh God. Because I missed out on Brandon Miller because of, that's a story I'll tell you about you guys, maybe offline. But like, I'm sweating. He finally goes at 30 and I cashed that. And I was like running around the house for this player out of Missouri that like a week ago I've been like, oh, there's no chance that he gets drafted. There's so much. I'm like, I had other bets on guys that I'd heard like, oh yeah, he's got a promise in the teens. Did not have a promise in the teens, but Kobe Brown made up for it. So that's like the fun of the NBA draft, I think, is betting on those first round options. I
had Koulibaly exact pick 8 to the Wizards, and of course they traded up to 7 to grab him. When Jarvis Walker was gonna go 7. I don't.
Gonna go 7.
They traded. They gave up more assets to get a guy that nobody else wanted, and I lost my pick, which just like summarizes how my whole like 2 months have been. It's just like, oh, right thought process, just not the same result.
It's brutal, but a lot of fun.
Matt, this has been awesome. Plug your socials and your Action app, and we'll get out of here.
Yeah, man, check me out both in the app and on Twitter at HPBASKETBALL. Make sure to check out if you're interested in listening more about NBA betting as well as WNBA betting. We've got our podcast Buckets, absolutely phenomenal podcast. We're one of the only gambling podcasts that goes 5 days a week during the regular season. It's a grind, but it's a lot of fun. We got so many great contributors, made a lot of money this season. Check it out, Buckets, wherever you get podcasts.
Yeah, it's a great podcast, and also Matt, you're welcome to Buckets is like stuck in my head every time I ever think of NBA because of the amount of times I've edited the stuff and whatever. But like Buckets is always in my head.
gotta have a hook for the intro. I'm like worried about it, and I settled on welcome to Buckets. So.
Yeah, the emphasis.
Getting the updates in Slack that like it's like Buckets is now live or Buckets now or whatever. And I'm like, this thing goes 5 days a week. That is.
We made the decision. They were just like, because of all the stuff we talked about in this pod, I was like, look, I told our guy, Matt Mitchell, I was like, look, the only way for us to do an NBA pod well is if we do it 5 days a week, because you got to be in the grind. You got to do it every day. And he was like, do you want to do that? And I was like, I didn't say I wanted to do that. I said, this is what we're going to have to do. And that's what we do. And it's a lot of fun.
You're like, Matt, this is light work. I once had to pick every single game.
Exactly. Exactly.
Be sure to follow Charlie in the Action app at Charlie DiSturco. MLB in full swing. It's real fun. You go 3-0 one day, 0-3 the next day. It's really a blast. So follow Charlie on Twitter and the Action app. I'm at TimmyCal12 on Twitter, TKalinowski12 in the app. Thank you, Matt Moore. It was a pleasure. And make sure everyone enjoy your 4th of July weekend. Hot dog eating, contest betting. There's still a lot Still a lot to bet on. Still a lot of fun to have. It's the dog days of summer officially. So thank you guys for tuning in and good luck with your gambling this weekend.